Okay, so I'm just going to take you quickly through an example paragraph from one of the essays that was submitted on Animal Farm so that I can show you a number of different features of successful essay writing in a really good student example. So, one of the most commonly written targets that I've put on your essays is something along the lines of frame your topic sentences in relation to the writer, the prose convention, and the prompt, or frame your topic sentences in terms of how the text is written. This is a fantastic example of a topic sentence that does precisely this. The author uses the character Mr. Jones as an example of a cruel and incapable ruler despised by the animals. Bang. This is a really, really good topic sentence because it's focused, first of all, on something that the writer is doing deliberately with a prose convention, characterization. So the writer uses the character Mr. Jones to create this particular meaning as an example of a cruel and incapable ruler despised by the animals. So we've got all three of those components there. How does Orwell? The prompt was focused, remember, on how Orwell uses characters and events to reveal some of the novel's central preoccupations. And we've got here a character being used to show cruel and incapable rulership. So we've got all three of those elements that you'll see on those targets. The writer, an element of prose, convention, the character, and then its meaning. So that's one of the main bits of feedback that I've issued in this particular essay. Then we go on a little further to take a look at how an example is well handled and then commented upon. And this is what we would call, from here down to here, is what we would call really an evidence cluster. And it deals with three questions. What is the writer doing? When are they doing it? And how? And then why? Why are they doing it? Okay. So we've got here some explanation about some context for the example. The story starts out with the animals being ruled by Mr. Jones, and throughout his rule, he demonstrates what kind of ruler he is. And we move here onto the quotation. When we were first introduced to Mr. Jones, he was too drunk to remember to look after the animals. And so this is particularly effective. It's a good example of what is outlined in the topic sentence, but it's also a small embedded quotation here. This quotation is embedded very smoothly into this sentence, which is the student's own. When we were first introduced to Mr. Jones, he was too drunk to remember to look after the animals. Then the student develops this with an excellent comment on its significance from here down to here. Jones had been lacking proper principles, order, and priorities. He had a very careless and nonchalant attitude when it came to taking care of the animals, and for this they suffered a lot, especially through malnutrition. So we've got here an explanation of the significance of this very short example, but this is doing lots of different things. It's using an example, it's embedding it very well, and then going on to explain the implied significance of this particular example. And so this is often, if you've got a target that says T3, you need to focus on using this particular, using an example from the text. T5, you need to do this, include the quotation smoothly inside one of your own sentences. And usually those sentences will begin with a description of what a character is doing or what the narrator or the writer is doing. Then, if you've got T6, it usually means you need to comment in more depth on the example that you've mentioned. And this is a particularly good example of how to do so. Now, the one thing that's missing, and it's missing on a number of different parts of your essay, a number of different essays, is this final target here, T9, and this is the only thing really missing from this particular student response. So if we take a look through the rest of the paragraph, I'll explain how you can develop T9, an explanation of the writer's argument, following on from the rest of this paragraph. The animals had no other choice than to hate the humans and look after themselves due to the disrespect and recklessness towards the animals. After he left, the circumstances were the same, even with Mr. Jones gone. The pigs still used him to their advantage. The pigs continuously tell, I think that's the pigs and the other animals, that they must continue working harder, or else it would mean that they would want Jones back. Again, a nice short quotation, smoothly embedded. But H4 means that you've developed an idea here with a second example. We've developed this idea about poor rulership, poor leadership, with a second example and the way that the animals take advantage of Mr. Jones. And that quote, again, is smoothly embedded into this. Napoleon and the rest of the pigs used the idea of Mr. Jones to threaten or force the animals and to scare them into working harder. I could have easily bracketed this and put a H6 here and said, this is a fantastic example, again, of an explanation of the implied significance of the example that's used. T9 here is a space to talk about Orwell's argument. And again, we're using that type of language that you've just used in the character evaluation activity that we did in the last class. And it could be something along the lines of, Orwell may be arguing at this point in the text that irrespective of background and species, the position of absolute power encourages corruption. And so we're talking there again about that concept of absolute power corrupts absolutely. If someone has complete power, they inevitably become corrupt. And so we're not there talking about, Orwell uses these ideas to write about the theme of power. We're using this particular space here to suggest gently what Orwell's argument about power might be, that if power is absolute, there is a definite probability that that power will lead to corruption, and that this is what we're looking for in this final space.